Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com. Let's get ready for Nashville. Early week research. We're digging in. You should dig into the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet, which you can get July, $30, Nashville, Chicago, Pocono, Indy, IRP, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. Just send the money over. I'll send the sheet to you. Early week research. This is a DNT track. It's kind of a made-up term that I've come up with, because in my mind, Dover, Texas, and Nashville are very similar. They correlate. Drivers that run well at Dover, run well at Nashville, run well at Texas. Dover and Nashville, not really a surprise. They're both concrete tracks. A lot of people aren't really going to disagree with me there. And if you just simply go through our 3 years of Nashville data, we tend to see the drivers that are running well at Nashville are drivers that also run well at Dover. We all know Truex runs well at Dover. Hamlin runs well everywhere. Elliott's been great at the concrete tracks. Larson and Byron, very solid records at Texas, at Dover. Elliott won at Texas earlier this season. Dover, Nashville, Texas. Probably aren't going to disagree, Dover and Texas. And I've talked about this before. Well, maybe you'll disagree, Dover, Texas. Let's just say, all right, slow down. The Dover setup is often similar to the Charlotte setup. Charlotte is often pretty similar to Texas, but there's other reasons why I think Texas is close to Nashville. Again, Dover, Nashville, concrete. We probably agree there. You may not agree with Texas to Nashville. And the reason why I like comparing Texas to Nashville is it is a one groove, intermediate track, limited passing. Often, if you want to make gains, it's going to have to be on pit road or it's going to have to be on restart. Nashville is a one groove, intermediate track. I don't necessarily like looking at Kansas, Darlington, or Charlotte. I wouldn't completely rule those out in the intermediate track package, but I downgrade those. Reasons being, look, Darlington's its own beast. We all understand that. Kansas is a wide groove where you can run bottom, middle, and top. And we have seen that in this package. Much more passing and a lot more freedom for the drivers. Whereas, again, Texas, Nashville, that's not the case. Charlotte, though, is not really a wide track. So you would think, oh, well, then maybe it leans into this. But because Charlotte is such a narrow track and the drivers are bunched together, it rubbers up in a way that there does tend to be different grooves that develop at Charlotte. That's not the case at Texas. That's not the case at Nashville. So that's my argument. Now, if you want to not look at Texas as much, that is fine by me. It's, everything is completely up to you. I can have my own opinion. But Nashville may be an eclectic town these days with eclectic musical patterns and all kinds of variety. But this racetrack is not eclectic. It is one groove. There is only one groove they're jamming on, not multiple different variations of bro country to old school honky tonk. This is one groove, and that one groove, like old school Nashville, is just a one groove, one honky tonk, one style of music, one lane. Very much like Texas, and for the most part, how Dover runs. Although we do sometimes see a different lane kind of come in at Dover for specific drivers. So there it is. There's your DNT analysis, and I've got a sheet in the spreadsheet that kind of goes over last year, who ran well at Dover, Nashville, and Texas. And then looking at Texas and Dover this year, if we look at last year's drivers that ran well in the DNT tracks, we'll see Ross Chastain had a really strong year. Season kind of fell apart after that Nashville win and went through that big summer slump last year. But one of the arguments but then he came back to life when they went to Texas later in the season, surprisingly enough. Now, one of the reasons why I probably struggled at not just the intermediate tracks I have on the screen, but the summer session, you're all over the place. And I'm not surprised to see Trackhouse not really able to replicate the speed, whereas earlier in the season, you do a lot more of the intermediate track racing. In the summer, we're doing road courses, we're doing plate tracks, etc. Either way, the names shouldn't be surprising. Chastain, Hamlin, Byron, Buescher on his heater last year. We're probably surprised to see Larson not up there, but Larson had some difficulties in specific races, Dover in particular. But then he came back, and these are Dietrich data ratings. We're looking at all the laps, top 5, top 10, top 15, top 20, and running a calculation. So there's that sheet if you want to see it. Again, that's last year, so I don't want to overreact to that. You expand it a little bit further to this year and previous years, and the names that we expect to lead laps and run at the top are not going to be surprising. And if this is going to be a one groove track, and this tends to possibly lean into a green flag race, then the guys that are always good will continue to be good. The guys that are good in practice will replicate that speed, and we'll go over that data in a second. But before we do, we might as well look at the Nashville laps from last year. And as I mentioned, in this race, at this track, it is very hard to pass. And you kind of are where you are. You got what you got. When you look at Ross Chastain last year, 92% in the top 5. Truex, 95% in the top 5. Hamlin's up there all day. Elliott takes him a second to get up there, but then he stays in the top 10 for pretty much the entire race. Larson, we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, but then once he's in the top 10, he's etched in. They're etched in stone. Now, it does look like at the beginning, there's quite a bit of movement here. Well, we have some drivers with pretty good cars in practice that just didn't qualify well. Once Bell gets his spot in the top 10, you can see here, 79%, 6 most laps inside the top 10. Eric Jones, we'll talk about practice again here in a second. He just didn't qualify very well. Had a pretty good car in practice, starts a little further back than he should, gets to where he should, stays where he should. Not quite a top 10 car, but running in the top 15 all day. Kyle Busch had a solid day until his solid day was, kind of was all over the place. Had some issues, had an issue early in the race. AJ Allmendinger also was very good. I believe had some issues on the track occasionally with bumping, pit road. But either way, what you'll find out is the car that you had in practice is the car that you had in the race. And there's really not a lot of passing that's going to happen. So when that's the case, we could, as we saw earlier this year at Texas, when there's limited passing, then obviously pit road strategy is going to be important. So you're going to want to look at some pit road data, make sure that you're familiar with the drivers that are minimizing pit road time, pit box, in and out. But also we could see restarts that get hairy because drivers have to be really aggressive. And then we do see that's where a good portion of some gains can be made. You can see Chase Elliott grabs 5 spots pretty early in the run. And then as we run green, he's probably not picking up much throughout. And drivers are aware of this. And we didn't really get restart madness last year, although there was a pretty goofy restart at the beginning of stage 3 that resulted in some mayhem and some wrecks. Ryan Blaney taking a big one. I believe also Kyle Busch was involved in that stage 3 situation. Where right here. But he's ultimately able to recover from it. He had another issue earlier in the race with, I think, a loose wheel or issue on pit road. Either way, as you look through the data, you're going to see not a lot of passing. There are some drivers that we can highlight that did probably have super elite cars that were really good. Truex was great, but Chastain was better. Chastain had long run speed and was able to run down Truex and Hamlin at times and take the lead back. Will he have that one calendar year later? It remains to be seen, but this is Trackhouse's backyard. They like to step up for this race. He has been really good at this track. Even Daniel Suarez was pretty fast. I know on your screen, Daniel Suarez is in the 20s. Yeah, but he ultimately finished 12th. Once he worked his way up there, he was pretty good and was able to replicate the speed he had in practice. So yeah, it's a year later. We don't know if Trackhouse will, again, have the setup dialed in, but we do know that last year, the best car was Chastain on the long run. Now, you could possibly make the argument that Kyle Larson had the best car, but he just never quite had the track position. Truex was very good. It was just Chastain was elite. Hamlin was pretty good, although he does get a little bit of a benefit from when a caution fell that allowed him to get to the lead and get a good restart. But then ultimately he'll lose the lead, so he wasn't as fast as Chastain. Elliott was solid, unable to follow up his 2022 win, but was right there in the group with Truex, Hamlin, and Elliott. Byron was right there all day. There's actually a really awesome moment at the beginning of stage 2 where Elliott or Byron, Chastain, and Truex are running 3 wide for 3 or 4 laps. It's really awesome to watch. If you check that out on YouTube, you really can't believe it. I mean, maybe you can after watching how spread out they were at New Hampshire last week at the end, but again, those rain tires. It was a weird situation. So to watch the intermediate track race at Nashville and these guys knowing how important it is to get out in clean air and to get out to the lead, and they run 3 wide, lap after lap in the lead. It's wild. Check that out. So Byron was right there. He ultimately does not get the lead, and then he has to just kind of settle back and take a spot. And he does cycle during some pit cycling to the lead here and there, but ultimately Chastain had the best car. Bell, maybe he could have been a part of this conversation had he had better track position as well. He doesn't. You can already see on your screen Jones moving forward, working his way forward, and a very strong performance. But again, just qualified a lot worse than they should have. And you run 300 laps. If you have a car that's 10th to 15th at Nashville, you're going to get to 10th to 15th. That's just the way that it is. Yeah, it's hard to pass. But if we run 300 laps and the majority green and you have a faster car than someone else, you're going to get up there eventually. It's not impossible to pass. It will sort itself out. Now, again, talking about the elite and Kyle Larson, at the beginning of the race, he was reporting that he was pretty tight. And so you can see him drop back. And then ultimately he is able to work his way back and earn some positions. And then I don't know if they were able to make a small, subtle tire pressure change or adjustment change during the green flag pit cycles from 42 to 46. But it seems like they did. Or he figured something out and he's able to move a little bit further, closer to the front, get back to almost where he began the race. So again, it looks like he has speed. The tight issue kind of hurt him a little bit. Didn't quite have the track position. So then we run the next run through. Pretty good, pretty solid, but unable to make gains on the other drivers up near the front. Pretty good. Now, you're probably like, oh, you were saying that maybe he has the speed that Chastain had. Well, again, we see him with poor restart, which can happen at Nashville. They're going to get bunched up and try to get everything. Loses a bunch of spots. But you really like what you see here at the beginning of stage 3, driving from 15th and just continuing to grind away and working forward, now up to 8th. And then at the end of the run, very end of the run, late in the race, long run speed, he is passing inside the top 10, which is very significant because we're not seeing very many other drivers pass inside the top 10. Works his way all the way back up to 5th place. So you think, man, if he would have started stage 3 a little closer to the front and had a good restart, then maybe he could have been in the mix. I definitely believe he could have been faster than the JGR cars and his Hendrick teammate. Remains to be seen if he could have tracked down Chastain. Chastain does a really wonderful job in this race. Not only does he have long run speed, but he dealt with a lot of hairy traffic in this race while Truex was trying to catch up with him. So a really phenomenal performance by Ross Chastain. And if you want to go through the lap by lap, I mean, look, it's pretty static. Now, some people might say, oh, how boring. But if you like DFS NASCAR, you're probably pretty excited. Because when we get races like this, they are very predictive. And we can lean heavily on practice data. We can really dive into the lap by lap data, which you can get at racefortheprize.com. PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, $30, Nashville, Chicago, Pocono, Indy, and IRP. And it'll be a fun weekend for it. Texas race, Xfinity race, Cup race this weekend. All the Nashville festivities that will be on the TV. I don't know what those are. Go down to, I went to Nashville this summer. It was too much for me. Too much of an old man. Not my scene. Wish it were. On paper, it's like, oh, yeah. But then you get down there and you see all these bridal parties and buses packed with drunk, crazy women. And people are like, wait a second, sign me up. How's that not your scene? You can't even imagine. Go walk into Broadway at Nashville and just see. It is Vegas, Southern Vegas, honky tonk Vegas. That is not an exaggeration. That is not hyperbole. Go down there, check it out. It ain't your daddy's Nashville. It ain't a honky tonk anymore. It's Kid Rock shooting machine guns. While that's cool, I'm just not built for that. All right. I think the big part of this podcast is going to be this page right here, where we look at last year's practice data and we compare it to where they finished and the fantasy points and their driver rating, et cetera, et cetera. And you can go through this as well. I think it'd be good if you got fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet access, something to look at. But real quickly, the practice data, TLDR, the practice data correlates strongly with where they ran. And two notables here. So somehow Justin Haley and Joey Logano are able to get out ahead of their skis and qualify really well despite not having good cars in practice. Now, having said that, practice data lines up with race data, and seeing that these two drivers qualified probably better than they should have, what do you think happened to both? They immediately dropped during the race. The practice data links up, right? I didn't mention Haley or Logano at all there, did I? They fell back. And I did talk earlier about how guys like Eric Jones didn't qualify as well as he probably should have based on his practice speed. And what happens during the race? You look at his times, 4th fastest, 15th on a 10-lap run, 10th fastest on the 5-lap run. What happens? He immediately works his way forward and is running in the top 15. Christopher Bell qualifies 22nd. Practice data suggests probably around top 10 car. That's where he ends up. Brad Keselowski, 20th. Practice data says he's probably around top 15 car. He is a top 15 car. AJ Allmendinger was a top 15 car. Kevin Harvick would have ended up there, but he has a wheel issue at the very end. Ty Gibbs has to deal with issues throughout the race. But also, you say, hey, it looks like around top 10 car. He's a top 10 car. Hey, why didn't we talk about Alex Bowman? Because in practice, he didn't have a good car. And in the race, he didn't have a good car. You can go down even further. Ryan Preece has a pretty solid race, running around 20th. That's what he had in practice. It's pretty locked in. Let's sort real quick before we. Now, I didn't talk about Tyler Reddick, unfortunately, because Tyler Reddick lost a wheel. So they go through a pit cycle. I might as well put this on the screen. One of the few cautions that we have. And we'll go down here to Reddick. It's a bad day. Reddick was running really well, battling with Chastain early on. But here, and so he's leading laps. I probably should make sure that we mention him. Right, he's running in top 5. We go through pit cycling here, and he gets through his cycle, drives a lap, and then his wheel comes completely off. Brings out the caution. That was that for Reddick. So we look at driver rating. We'll sort it based on, and it's just the shortest, easiest way to, do the podcast. You can do it however you want if you got access to the sheet. But look, here we go. We're ranking top, 14 drivers here in terms of driver rating, which, average running position, laps led, fast laps, etc. And then you look over here at the practice. It's all green. There aren't any surprises. The drivers, this is a one-groove track. And the one-groove intermediate tracks like Texas, Dover, and Nashville, we see this. Unless, of course, we get restart madness. And we get strangely timed cautions. Like at Dover a couple months ago, the ultimate Dover winning lineup was, the race wasn't crazy. It was just we get this caution late in the race, and several drivers ran long, like Daniel Hemrick. He caught the caution at the right time, and he became the value play and ended up finishing a lot better than where he should have. But that also hammers in the point that why was Daniel Hemrick, after he caught that caution, got that lucky break, able to finish better than where he should have? Because again, these intermediate tracks are hard to pass, and track position means everything. He had the track position from there on out and hangs on and ends up in the optimal lineup. So, yeah, the only thing that could hurt us is if we get random cautions. But once they fan out and start running single file, we really shouldn't get those cautions. Now, if Jacques Debray, the debris caution, rears its ugly head, they don't do that anymore, thank goodness. Remember they used to do the debris caution to us all the time? I expect a green flag a lap turner where we can lean on the practice data. You can see on your screen how it correlates. Doesn't really need any convincing. If you do, you can listen to previous podcasts where I've talked about Nashville. You can Google up the previous podcast where we've done Dover. We've done Texas. The only time that, now Texas was pretty wild this year because we got Restart Madness and a bunch of wrecks. And so you kind of have to throw your hands up for that. But you could look through specific laps at Texas, certain green flag runs, and see, okay, well, I can't really adjust for if there's going to be mayhem or madness, and it's in the sheet here. But what you could do is just try to identify, well, who was fast during certain runs, because that's the best that we can do. Obviously, the race goes wild at the end, and we got all these cautions, but you could look at a 40-lap run and see, okay, who's got movement, who's running pretty well, and kind of circle around those drivers. Same thing for Dover. You're going to get the kind of wonkiness at the end, but even so, we get Hamlin with the win at Dover, was in the top 5 all day. Larson, second, top 5 all day. Martin Truex Jr. finishes third, ran the most laps inside the top 5. Kyle Busch had a good day. Kyle Busch started up front. I don't know, are we really going to go back to RCR the way things are going? I know what you're saying, but he was good at Nashville last year until he got involved in that wreck at the end. Well, he could be good again today at Nashville until something bad happens to him, because something bad happens to him every race. At New Hampshire, it wasn't like one bad thing happened to him. It wasn't two bad things. It got comical at a certain point. When the broadcasters are actually saying the words, you feel bad for Kyle Busch. Did we ever think that we were going to get to that point? And I was listening to SiriusXM radio, and they're talking about guys not going out at the top of their game, and talking about Kyle Busch and seeing how his career is just slowly fading into the ether. Did you ever think that was going to happen? It happens to them all. But boy, the way this thing is flaming out, New Hampshire was really the icing on the cake. The Kyle Busch haters are probably loving it, which I used to be a Kyle Busch hater, but I have simmered down and calmed down into my old weary years. But yeah, the Kyle Busch haters probably loving it. Probably love New Hampshire. That was just terrible. Anyway, yeah, so Kyle Busch back on the board again this week. Have fun with that. Track position was a big thing there at Dover. Should have been at Texas. But yeah, and it will be this week. So we'll close out looking at the optimal lineup from last year. Thanks for joining me. Pretty quick one, hopefully a very helpful one. Get you some early week fantasy NASCAR takes. So we got Ross Chastain, no surprise. We got Martin Truex Jr., no surprise. Denny Hamlin, no surprise, up front the entire time. Eric Jones, really not a surprise if you're looking at the practice data. Didn't qualify as well as he should have. AJ Allmendinger, same thing. Had a fast car in practice, didn't qualify as well as he should have at 6,500. And then the last one that squeezes in is Austin Dillon. RCR had good cars at this track. As I mentioned, Kyle Busch. Austin Dillon was also pretty solid in practice. We'll go ahead and pull up Dillon's practice data. He starts the race in 26th. Let's go down to Ace. I guess his practice times weren't that great, but to see him finish where he does, it's not too much of a surprise. We could argue, we could go over that, and we could look more at his lap-by-lap data and analyze it, but overall, it looked like RCR had a pretty good car. Let's see what they have done there the last couple seasons real quick to see if Dillon had been strong. Yeah, and you look at what Austin Dillon did. Nashville, top 15 car in the 3 races. We'll go over and look at the DNT from last year. Dover, Nashville, Texas, and see how he ranked if he was a top 20 driver. Not good at Dover. Top 20 driver at Nashville. Texas looks like he got in a wreck. But then this year's been a whole nother thing. So, look, not every value pick is going to be explainable without going in through the entire context of the race and reading and watching every single lap. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Dover, Nashville, Texas. That's what I'm looking at. Is Texas too much for reach? Fine, then Dover. Or just look at Nashville. The familiar names pop up. Blessed to have you guys around. I truly love you guys. Trip the light fantastic.